that it was developing into a slightly processional Grand Prix. And then when I sort of saw Bottas go purple in Sector 1, I sort of went, "Ooh, look, something's about to happen." And then we saw the Ferrari pit crew peel into the pit lane, and we were speculating as to whether it was just Mercedes trying to give them a nudge and force Ferrari into an early stop. And Toto Wolff did say that they were aware that Ferrari were marginal on front left and were possibly prone to being forced into making an early stop and therefore going on to a two-stopper. And that's what came about. But then it was slightly disappointing that Mercedes stop then was a little bit slower, so they didn't make the undercut, as it were, work.
Not the first time that we've seen Bottas do everything he can probably do on track, and circumstances taking something away from him, is it? So we had China, where he did everything he could and probably deserved to win that race, but then the safety car changed it. The safety car then came in his favour in Baku, and he hit the debris on the start-finish straight, and when he was winning, and here he should have had a second place earned on merit at the time. And what did he lost 1.4 seconds to the Ferrari in the pits?
Yeah, it was in that vicinity, and he had the gap because
he'd nailed his the lap before the in-lap and the in-lap, which combined with Vettel not being able to switch the mediums, didn't he, Vettel?
Yeah, Vettel also had Magnussen. He dropped just behind, and getting the mediums to work. But in total, on those 2 laps that Bottas had, he gained 2 seconds on Vettel from he'd done
the job, hadn't he?
The advantage over Vettel when Vettel came out of the pits.
Yeah, he'd done the job.
Did we see what went wrong in the stop? Because I did
the right rear, they couldn't get it off.
Yeah.
Well, they could, but it took them a second and a bit to get it. It was just a bit of a sticky right rear.
I suspected it was that because I'd done that goober thing of wandering over to the window to have a look, and the right rear was the only bit that I couldn't see from my angle because, of course, that weird arrangement with the windows we have where they slope out and you've got the safety barrier that stops you actually looking over. So from what I could see, it was a perfectly adequate stop, except he was stationary for longer than expected. And like I said, the right rear was the only bit of the car I couldn't see.
Obviously, it ended up becoming trivial anyway, didn't it? So,
well, this is the thing, wasn't it? With Vettel then making another stop, obviously things got a little bit mixed up there because you then had the Red Bulls coming into the equation because Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo, who'd run 5th and 6th early on, then Raikkonen had sat 4th and then eventually retired with some kind of engine problem, power loss. Maybe it was related to the ERS. We're not 100% sure at this moment, but he was wiped out of the equation, which is a shame because he had another decent weekend. And unlike Vettel, he was fairly confident that he could have won stops because he wasn't quite so hard on the front left. So that would have been interesting. But you ended up.
Sorry, I mean the Vettel situation's interesting because I asked a perfectly innocuous question at the press conference about the VSC timing, and I said, I think my question was, was it actually the case that you really needed to stop, or was there a belief that you could stop and get out ahead of Verstappen, and that precipitated that bizarre rant about people cheating the VSC regime, which was quite bizarre.
Well, it was odd as well because I'm not entirely sure what he was getting at there, because looking at where the gaps were, I remember saying to you, Scott, when it happened, it's like, well, he'll come out between the 2 Red Bulls because that was where the natural gap was going to be. I think I'd be interested to know what Vettel could have done, because often teams and drivers think they won't make it on wear, etc. But maybe he could have made it to the end of the race. But the thing that amazed me is giving up track position at a track like Barcelona is a big, big, big risk. It's not like China, where you've got that great long straight with the DRS zone into the hairpin where you can pass with relative ease if you've got a speed advantage. It is hard to overtake there. So for Ferrari to take the move to drop behind both Verstappen and Bottas and sacrifice track position means they must have been absolutely certain he couldn't have made it to the end. Were they right, though?
Well, that's the thing. And if they were right, obviously they wouldn't have pit Vettel unless they thought that he wouldn't have been able to make it to the end. By extension, there's the suggestion that means that Mercedes couldn't either, or would be struggling and have to really nurse it to the end. So then you've got the situation where the track position becomes less important, because not only do you have fresh tyres and a faster car, you're then going to catch a car that's massively limping at the end. So if if their data, their understanding and their assumption, logic, belief, whatever you want to call it, was that these tyres will really, really struggle to make it to the end, then it was logical to do it at that point because virtual safety car came out, so the time loss was not minimal, but it was lessened. But the problem is, that's not how it transpired. Okay, Bottas was nursing the front left more than Hamilton towards the end, so there was difficulty there. They made it to the end with relative comfort, to be honest. So I struggle to believe that Ferrari weren't left feeling a little bit like, oh, we've dropped the ball there.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because we see a little bit of a different approach between Mercedes and Ferrari in terms of how they react to things. Mercedes, this year, to their credit, they've been very open in terms of if they've made errors. Toto Wolff's been happy to say straight after races, yeah, I think we did it for that reason. So the reasons made sense at the time, but actually the correct thing to do would have been that. And they do their debrief YouTube things, their pure pit wall videos, which can be quite insightful. Whereas Ferrari, it's just anything happens, it's like, nope, wasn't a mistake, nope.
Could have done anything different.
I mean, it's difficult. Different cars behave differently. Wear and degradation vary between cars and drivers. So we can't say that just because Bottas stopped on lap 19 and got to the end on mediums doesn't mean that Vettel could have done. But the fact that Raikkonen was heading to maybe do that, admittedly going fractionally slower, albeit not on a completely different level, just a few tenths slower, record he could do it. So you have to say, well, maybe they could have done. And were Ferrari convinced that others were going to two-stop? Because we heard some of the radio chatter, there seemed to be some surprise that the Red Bulls were going to go on to one stop. So I think we have to put this down as a possible strategy error from Ferrari, especially as they maybe could have waited to see a little bit longer to see what happened, but perhaps they just thought, well, VSC, we can at least guarantee we stay ahead of Daniel Ricciardo.
I think they got it wrong, but what do I know? I'm just a humble man in an attic. So
I think you might be right.
Wearing a yellow. What is that? Football? Is that a football T-shirt?
It's a Swedish football team T-shirt.
Scott likes Swedish things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Why didn't we have IKEA meatballs at any time this weekend?
Well, probably because we're nowhere near an IKEA, Cottis.
No, what's the big IKEA? There was. It did seem fairly telegraphed in advance that Red Bull were going to stick on one stop, because I think Ricciardo, in his post-qualifying press conference, when he was ranting about the tyres, which we have a story coming up, which will probably have been published on Autosport.com by the time this podcast is available. He was saying that it's been obvious since Friday that we would probably be doing a one-stop with soft onto medium.
And obvious for everyone as well, because it was clear, even from the outside of teams, that soft, medium, one-stopper was the ideal way to do it. So, yeah, I do find it a little bit
Except for there was that message during the race where Bottas was told that it's clear Red Bulls are one-stopping, they're ahead of us on track, so they are a threat, which was suggesting that there was going to be another stop.
Yeah,
so,
I think Mercedes may have been thinking about it.
I mean, but I guess obviously if Bottas was the guy that was the one of the two Mercedes guys that was nursing the front left towards the end, then maybe it makes sense that he was having to think about it more than Lewis. I don't know.
Well, he stopped a lot earlier as well in response to Vettel, so maybe Bottas's race had gone a little bit astray, because I was surprised by how early Vettel stopped.
It didn't seem to make sense.
And I think Mercedes, I was looking and thinking, well, if I'm Mercedes, do I pit Bottas? But they wanted to take the chance to gain track position over him, which they all but did, but didn't because of the sticky right rear. So it's always difficult to know where teams are going to go with this. But whatever way you spin it, Ferrari held second and finished fourth with a Vettel car. So that's not a good day, is it?
The thing that I find really curious about the Ferrari thing is the biggest evidence that their move for fresh tyres and seeding track position was a blunder was the fact that he couldn't properly catch a slightly damaged Max Verstappen Red Bull in third, could he, at the end? Because I think he got within DRS range by the end, but there was a time where he was just sort of hovering a couple of seconds away. He just didn't really seem to sort of crack on. It's like, well, you're on fresh tyres. Verstappen's got a damaged end plate because he'd clipped the back of Lance Stroll's Williams at the VSC restart. I thought he was there for the taking, and Verstappen, to be fair to him afterwards, said he didn't quite have the negative impact that he thought that losing that part of the wing would have, and he was able to manage it a bit better. But I still thought he was there for the taking, especially as the Ferrari was marginally quicker than the Red Bull this weekend. So if he couldn't catch and pass a Red Bull, he clearly had no chance of catching and passing a Mercedes.
Yeah, and he was chipping away at Verstappen at 2 or 3 tenths a lap, sometimes half a second a lap, and we were saying to each other, he's going to get him by the end. And then, to be honest, again, just even before he ran out of laps, he just wasn't quite close enough, was it? It was as if he'd kind of capitulated, but that seems to be very much Formula One in 2018, that sometimes if it gets marginal, a driver will just bank the points rather than stressing their engine with an attack over the final laps.
Yeah, it does often seem to be the way. The gap was only 7 tenths at the end, but the last couple of laps, Verstappen gave away a few seconds because he wasn't really under threat. So, I mean, that Verstappen incident,
I'm glad you've got your lap time chart there. Otherwise,
like
we'd be lost, wouldn't we?
I always like to have a glance to make sure I'm not talking complete nonsense, just partial nonsense. But Verstappen's drive started 5th, ran 5th, picked up the place when Raikkonen retired, picked up the place when Vettel made the second stop. Fairly uneventful beyond that, except for that moment with Lance Stroll under the VSC when he hit the back of him. Was that another Verstappen disaster, or are we going to give him a free pass for that one? Because the VSC is slightly unusual, and these things do happen.
I think so. It was quite a grown-up drive from Max, wasn't it? I think it was the sort of drive he needed after being kind of front and centre of the news recently for being a bit wild. He actually did need to have a settled race where he didn't actually do anything hugely spectacular and just brought home a good result.
He insisted pre-race that he didn't have anything to react to after his bad start to the season. He said that momentum works both ways. Sort of, if you find yourself in this sort of bad spell where you keep getting caught up in incidents, making the wrong decision, that sort of thing, then it looks worse from the outside because people sort of make connections and say, oh, well, this is linked to this and to this, when actually it was just Max was viewing them as separate, isolated bad incidents. And he actually talked about if he wants anything, he wanted to sort of put together a positive spiral rather than a negative one, which I think this weekend will probably be the start of, because it wasn't the boring, plain race he wanted, because he did have that incident with Stroll, and it did make the final stint a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. But he has bagged his first podium of the season. He did outperform his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who, even for Max's discretion at the VSC, Ricciardo managed to trump it by spinning at the safety car restart. Thought he was really lucky it didn't cost him more than just a bit of lost time and a bruised ego. But Verstappen was actually pretty solid today, and I think it does bode well, especially going into Monaco. It gives him that little bit of confidence that you need there. So Verstappen in a quick Red Bull around Monaco, back on form, should be something to relish.
It was interesting, the Ricciardo spin, which we still haven't actually seen what happened, but it happened just as the VSC was removed and it went green again in the turn 10 left-hander. So clearly he's looped it on the throttle, which is a little bit embarrassing. We have seen drivers doing that. I guess the only thing we can say that these things do happen with drivers is Sergei Sirotkin back at turn 9 coming out of Kamsa did exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and we saw that, didn't we? But
yeah,
then
we
again,
did, yeah.
he did have the excuse of having his suboptimal posterior seating position.
Yes, which you were taking great delight in writing about. Could you explain that a little more?
It's quite tricky because I think he had a PR person next to him warning him to be careful in his phrasing in his post-race presser, but I suspected he was a little bit constricted in the genital region based on his comments. He was talking around it a little bit, but he said he was so uncomfortable it was actually a struggle to finish the race, and he could really sort of barely concentrate at the end, and he said the spin was partly a result of that.
Are you suggesting that his chestnuts were roasting on an open fire?
I think it was. Nat King Cole was warming up.
I don't think Williams should try and constrain what Sirotkin says, because that's been one of the best things about Williams.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed him, and not just from a talks nonsense gives you an easy soundbite and a great headline and everyone clicks on it. Not at all. He's just very, very open and insightful, and you get that combination of someone who's sort of willing to say what he thinks but actually has something really considered to say, because he's a very smart guy.
Yeah, exactly. An engineering background, of course, so he has a good communication with that technical side of the team. He's not there engineering the car, but they kind of speak the same language. They're on the same wavelength.
We've gone off piste a little bit on the topics we were discussing, but as we've got onto Williams, and as has already been mentioned, Sorokin did make that mistake, but Stroll had another good race
Yeah,
today.
hat tip, great first lap, and